everybody, and happy holidays from me, and welcome to this special video for the VTuber Racing 2024 season. Today's gonna be a little different. Normally I would be in here talking about the race coming up and the race from the week prior, and we go through what to look forward to in the race. However, for this week, because of the holiday season, there are no races going on this weekend. That will be next weekend when we go to Dover. And I will also talk more about the races coming after Dover next week as well. Today we're going to be doing something a little special here. We're going to be talking through and recapping our first 4 races of this very unique series. I won't be in the studio for long here. I will let the 4 recap videos replay themselves, essentially. The race recap videos will all be chaptered as well, so if you want to recap a specific race, whether that be Daytona, Texas, Rainbow Road, or the last race at Martinsville, they will all be chaptered out and they can be clicked on thanks to YouTube. I won't be coming back in here until probably about another half an hour to 40 minutes, in which case I'll probably talk just a little briefly about what to look forward to in the next couple of weeks. With that out of the way, let's take a look back, all the way back to when this series first started, at Daytona. Daytona is known for a lot of different things. Speed, pack racing, you can name a lot of different reasons as to why Daytona is very important. One thing that is very important though, winning at this track is huge for your career as a racer. And what better way than to put 37 VTubers all at Daytona. And that is what happened last Sunday. 37 drivers took the field at Daytona Motor Speedway, led by the number 99 car of Simu and Noriboshi. How did this race go down? Well, let's do a quick recap of all of the events that happened during Daytona last week. The race started off very normal, side-by-side racing, normal for what you would see at Daytona. Didn't last long, however, as our very first incident of today only came on lap number 9, ironically involving the number 9 car. Henya with a big run on Wimble, with Henya moving down, smashing into the 9 car and junking a lot of other individuals. All drivers involved though were able to get their damage repaired and kept going the whole rest of the way through. The one that got the most damage out of that though was the one who kinda started it all, which was Wimble in the 9 car. However, that wasn't the only big one out of this race today. Just a couple laps later, 4 wide at Daytona? I don't think that's gonna work. A ton of cars involved in this accident here. Number 17 of Fu and Ju is going to be the one that's going to be upside down here. Many cars stuck on the bottom of the apron, including number 11 of Weebu, 26 of Bao, Fruit, Dreamer, and the pole sitter all involved, and as well as Melody. All drivers involved in this wreck all managed to make it back to the pits and continue racing. Another look at the massive wreck that happened here. See a lot of cars getting involved in the race, including one that we will talk about here shortly soon. However, not to be all doom and gloom, as there are some drivers that ended up missing this wreck. A lot of them hanging on to the bottom of the track, which may as well be the safest place to be whenever a 4 wide situation like that happens. Another thing that was very prevalent in this race last week was the amount of lead changes that we had. 26 drivers led a lap in this race. We'll talk about who got the bonus point for leading the most lap here very soon. Cautions were aplenty in the early stages of this race. Just a couple laps after the second caution, our very own catch fence was involved in this accident here on lap 33. Malcolm, Merriweather, Selene, many cars involved in this one, including Fillion again. Not the last time we'll say her name in an accident, but this one had to have been one of the worst wrecks we have seen, at least in our short season so far. Hopefully, not gonna be outdone. And in case you're wondering, yes, all cars involved somehow drove away, but this was starting to become an issue here for this race. 33 laps in and 3 cautions and a ton of time spent pacing. However, this wasn't going to last very long. Just only a couple laps into this caution period, everybody would be coming down into the pits. While pit stops were underway, I don't think anybody in the crowd or on track knew what was in store for the future of this race. With the restart ensuing after the pit stops, the field jumped out to an incredible 4-car pack that soon turned down into a handful of cars. And the pace car would no longer be seen on track for the foreseeable future. However, we still had a few more cautions left, but there was still a very, very long green flag run, which also consisted of David in the 77 running 17 laps out front, the most in the race. Once again, this was a very long green flag run with only a handful of cars in the rear view mirror of whoever was out in front, including David. We see a couple other shots here, you'll see how small just the main pack was. And biggest storyline out of all of this was the fact that not all of these cars were battling for the lead. In fact, for the majority of this green flag run, there was only 4 cars in this main pack running for the first place spot. Everybody else was running for the lucky dog. But the run wouldn't last very long, as on lap 80, another big wreck ensues, involving the 78 Affiliate again, Fruit and Hano, ending what was a very, very long green flag run that included green flag pit stops. However, not the last caution we will see here. In fact, the last caution that came out came just only a handful of laps after the ensuing restart. With the field now bunching back up, a pack of 4 cars turned into a battle of 20 to 30 more cars, 3 by 3. With the aggression up all the way to the max, maybe a bit too aggressive was the 6 of Lucky, who got into the 11 car Weebu, sending them up the track and colliding with, again, the pole sitter and multiple other cars. Now with the restart being down to 3 laps of green flag racing, with 30 cars all packed up, who would win at Daytona? Callie took the lead on this ensuing restart, and on the white flag, well, here's the call. 1 lap to go here at Daytona Motor Speedway. Callie hangs on to the lead this time by, but will she hang on to it this next time by? Nori takes it to the bottom of the track. They're gonna door each other. They are stacking up behind. Big wreck in the back of here, the backfield here. Lots of cars involved. Lots of cars missing it. Dreamer's upside down. Fifi with a ton of back end damage. Noriboshi, Lumen, Callie, the top three gone from the rest of the field. It is going to be a dogfight back here. Does anybody have anything left for the 94 who pulls out in front? Does not look like it. Side by side for second. But all by herself, surviving the melee, Noriboshi is going to hang on and win it at Daytona. An incredible start for the 94 team, as they will roll into Texas Motor Speedway with a W, and not only that, the points lead. So far in the season, 103 laps have been completed, 16 of those laps under pacing conditions. Looking at the full results for the Daytona 250 race, we'll see here that Noriboshi is leaving this event with 1 lap led, that being the last lap. We'll also see here that she is the only driver that started in the top 10 that finished in the top 10. Biggest mover of the race was in fact the number 2 car, who started all the way in the very back of the field in 36th place. Moving on outside the top 10, we'll see our pole sitter Simu taking on a 12th place finishing spot heading into today's race, as well as Sprite in 20th place starting in 3rd place, and then there's D, who started in 5th, finishing in 18th place. Another thing to mention here is Fu in the 17 car finishing in 19th place after getting involved in the accident that brought out the last caution. Weebu finishing 14th, Star finishing in 15th, 2 drivers of the same nature as Fu. Moving on to outside the top 20, this is where we see a lot of drivers that almost had a shot at a great finish, but just wasn't able to survive the last few laps, including David, who finishes in 29th after leading the most amount of laps. David's going to have to crawl from very back in the points in order to make up, well, the deficit that was today here at Daytona. Gura, who started in dead last in the 1 car, finishing 25th. Lucky finishing 26th. There's a couple of other names as well that I should mention outside the top 20. William got involved in a few other accidents. He'll finish 24th. Now moving on from here, let's move on to the final 7 drivers of this race last week. These drivers here all failed to really make a name for themselves today, including Hano, who is the only retiree out of today's race, which is a bit surprising considering Philly had also got involved in like every single wreck. But I should point out too that this is also the order that which the points are heading into this race this week. So there will be no points update, as I'll send it back to the studio. With Daytona in the rear view mirror, we move down south to Texas Motor Speedway for round 2 of the 2024 VTuber Racing Championship season. With 37 drivers lined up on the grid, Kason and Lucky led the rest of the field into turn number 1. This is going to be a quick recap of all of the events that happened at a very, very crazy race down south at Texas Motor Speedway. Very different from what we saw at Daytona. So, with that out of the way, let's get the recap underway. A very aggressive turn 1 here by Fu, sending it 3 wide on row number 1. It's the perfect encapsulation of how this race ended up going. But actually not as bad as you would have thought. With a lot of 3 wide and side-by-side racing, you would expect a very caution-filled race. But instead, we had a pretty fair and pretty solid run. Very side-by-sidey for the back half of the field, but the front was pretty well established. Lots of cars strung out, lots of cars racing for position, lots of cars from second on back trading ways. But the one that kept consistent through the majority of our first green flag run was the number 17 car of Fu and Zhu. While not leading the most amount of laps in today's race, still a whopping 20 laps led for the number 17 team, which is more than what David led at Daytona just a few weeks ago. But not the one that led the most laps though. The one that led the most laps in last week's race was the number 30 car of Henya, leading 22 laps, most of them coming from the second half of this race. And with it being very caution-free, this race was really quick as well. Drivers heading into turn number 1 at a whopping 195 miles an hour letting out of the throttle just a little bit to bring it down to maybe 192, depending on if you were out front or side by side. And that's all Fu wanted to see in his rearview mirror was side-by-side racing. The longest green flag run pretty much all season, and it led to green flag pit stops, which shaped the course for the 17 team for the rest of the race for reasons that we will get into here momentarily. With a lot of people coming down into the pits, one driver that desperately needed something to change in the second half of the race was the pole sitter, Kason. Only being out front for a handful of laps in the beginning, fell all the way back to beyond the top 20 and stayed in the back half of the field for pretty much the entire race. With a bad pit stop, it wasn't going to get much better than that. With pit stops pretty much done and over with, that left a pretty big pack to only have about 3 or 4 cars, including the number 30 car of Henya, who led a majority of this final run en route to her 22 laps led of the entire race. This pack also included Fu as well, so the top 2 dominant drivers right on each other's tails. The pack then began to form back up, and that's what caused our first caution of last week's race. 4 wide at Texas, just like at Daytona, is not going to work. Fu getting into Cali, then gets into Lucky, then gets into Hano Mizuki once again, sending 4 cars into a tailspin just past the start-finish line, right in front of the second pack. Now, almost everybody got through it in the second pack, except 2 people, that being Melody in the 36 and Nana in the 85. Those 2 would suffer the most damage out of all of this wreck though, which is a bit surprising. Callie, Fu, and Lucky would also all have significant damage, but they would continue roughly. We'll see in the results later how they do, but the ones that got the worst out of this wreck weren't even the ones that started it, but the ones that came flying in. One more look at this wreck here, and you'll get to see what happens here. You see Nori up on the top here, just scraping by with maybe some side damage and some front end damage getting into Cali. But Nori, the winner of Daytona, will scrape by here with minimal damage. And the same could be said for the 86, getting a little bump and beaten bang on the sides here. But the ones that got the worst of it, Melanie in the 36, nailing the 17 of Fu. And then Nana in the 85 just coming in from out of nowhere and just destroying not only her car, but also Melody's as well. Those 2 would spend a lot of time in the pits to get that damage repaired. But while the cosmetic side of things were good once the restart happened, the 36 and the 85 would both suffer significant engine damage. With the caution out, everybody comes back into the pits to get themselves filled up for what would be another long green flag run. With another long green flag run ahead of this pack, the pack would be split up several times by the drivers that were involved in that first wreck, including the number 85 of Nana, who would go back into the pits under green to fix some more of that damage. Now, like I said, Callie and Fu both did not have a rear end, but they both still had some relatively good speed, and they kept up with 1 or 2 of the packs. The same cannot be said for the number 36 of Melody and the number 85 of Nana, who would get involved in the second wreck of the day. Thankfully, just a single car spin. Right in front of the pack, that could have been huge. But Nana kept it up on the turn 1 outside wall and just kept it to be a 1 car spin. With a restart coming to ahead here, one major thing as well is 27 drivers trading the lead 59 times, more than Daytona. And with a handful of laps to go, this is where the battle got tighter and tighter. Nose to tail, cars swimming for positions and track position, and it all came ahead. With a handful of laps to go, Pena out front, Iron Mouse and Fillion right on her tail. Pena trying to block, Pena trying to win very early on in the season. A very dominant run for the 30 team, but it was not meant to be. With a handful of laps to go, Iron Mouse peaked low, inside line, having the better out of all the lanes to be, would take the lead, and with just a handful of laps to go, had to then defend against a charging Fillion. And across the line, it will be 1 lap to go. Iron Mouse and Fillion single filed out. Third on back is being determined. It might be just these two to battle it out. White flag here at Texas. Iron Mouse, Fillion, single filed out. Everybody else side by side or even 3 wide. Off of turn 2, Fillion tried to make a move. Can she make the move this time by? Looks low. Iron Mouse stays high. They're going to be side by side. Fillion with the nose out ahead. Can Mouse hang on? Fillion hangs on. Side by side. It's going to be a tight battle. It's going to be Iron Mouse with the win here at Texas. The closest finish of the young season so far by 0.08 of a second. Iron Mouse hangs on and wins. With 2 races down and a whole lot more to go, here are the final results from last week's race at Texas. Iron Mouse gaining 31 spots to finish in first place, leading only 5 laps. Fillion in second. Sprite in third. Soleil for the second race in a row will finish in fourth. Pena and Fu, the 2 dominant cars, 5th and 6th respectively. Bimble finishing in 7th. Noriboshi, the winner of Daytona, finishing in 8th place after starting in the very back of the field. Same could be said with DJ Overdrive, who finishes 9th after starting in 31st. And Kobo gaining 20 spots to finish out the top 10. All but 2 drivers in this top 10 led a lap. The only 2 that did not were Sprite and Noriboshi. Moving on to outside the top 10, we see Simu leading 14 laps to finish in 18th place. But this is where we also see a lot of drivers who led maybe 1, if not a small handful of laps that finished just outside the top 10. Malcolm gained 1 spot from where he started to finish in 11th. William gaining only a handful, finishing 12th. Risu finishing in 13th after starting nearly dead last. Star finishing in 15th. D finishing in 14th. A lot of these drivers still struggling to find their footing early on in the season, only leading just a small handful of laps every race. Maybe this week will be different. Moving on to outside the top 20. This is where we see Fruit, who led the second most amount of laps in this race, finishing in an abysmal 28th finishing position. We see Merriweather, who also led 9 laps, more than a lot of other drivers that led in this race, still finishing back in 22nd. And then our pole sitter, Kason, finishing in an abysmal 23rd place. Now, here come the final 7 drivers. Dreamer, Callie, Lucky. Now, Callie, Lucky, and Melody all had issues with their cars, struggling to really go anywhere after the caution that took out both Melody and Nana. Selene and Reska, I'll talk more about them when we go back into the studio, where I will also have a points update to share off. Back to the studio. Our first race of the season took place in Daytona Beach, Florida. Our second took place in Texas. Our third race took us out of the planet of Earth and into space on a road course race of a lifetime. 2 races down, a bunch more to go, and our first of many wacky, unique tracks. We ran on the Rainbow Road last week, and this is going to be a recap of most of everything that happened during that last week's race. So let's get it going. This one was a very unique start because it is a standing start, and with the green flag waving, all 37 drivers went from 0 miles an hour and stepped on the gas up through the gears. The front row consisted of Bao in the 26 and Dreamer in the 89. However, the number 26 of Bao would have many problems on the first lap, including the first couple of turns, slamming the guardrail several times, both on the left and right side of the car, leaving everybody around her to be in a panic attack, including the 89 car of Dreamer, who was just running his own. And while Bao started off bad, it got worse. And it got worse for the 89 of Dreamer too, with Bao running into the 89 car and destroying her own car. The committee decided to black flag the 26 and bring her into the pits and hold her for 1 lap. And the 89 car, well, he was alright after the incident. He managed to get back going and fill in with the rest of the pack. Now that the first lap is out of the way, now the actual race can commence. And it was a pretty nice start to the race after the first lap. Everybody started spreading out, everybody started getting out in their own little battles. We saw a lot of great battles here early in the going as well. Early on, it was Tyroki in the 41 and Nana Asteria in the 85 looking pretty strong, just holding their own out front. In the early going, the pace car and the 26 kind of stayed in their own little lane inside the pits, but it wasn't to last very long, as just only a handful of laps into the race, our first of 3 cautions were to come out. It would have been in the middle of the field here, with Weebu and William getting a little too tight together when it comes to the battles, and involved Watson as well. All 3 would suffer significant damage. Watson would suffer the worst with a lot of front end damage, the hood getting crinkled all the way up to near over top the windscreen and all. But everybody else outside of that was completely fine. Restart with just only a handful of laps. After that, they would run once more. However, they wouldn't complete 1 full lap until another caution were to come out, and this one being more significant than the first, as Lumen in the 52 goes up and over and over and over and over and over, nearly going over top the guardrail and falling out from outer space into the abyss. While he would teleport to his pit stall, he would never be seen again on track, DNFing and finishing in last. Also involved in this wreck was Watson again, Iron Mouse, Fifi, and Selene all suffering a lot of damage, but everybody outside of Lumen continued on and without that much damage, in fact. A very close call here by the 24 of Star, as she just barely missed the 52, flipping over and over and over. After that old ordeal, another restart would occur, and this is where we would see our long green flag run of the day, consisting of a lot of comers and goers. 2 drivers that stayed pretty consistent up front throughout this entire run were the front 2 being the 73 of Callie and the 77 of David, while a lot of other drivers from third on back would appear out front, including the number 30 car of Henya. These 2 of the 77 and 73 would stay out front for a majority of the first set of the green flag runs. We had about a lot of I would say about 3 or 4 pit stops, green flag pit stops during this time, and throughout all of them, Henya, David, and Callie would all stay relatively close together. Callie took the lead early on in the restart, but once that 30 car picked her way through the pack, she would not look back. 26 lead changes totaling from 17 different drivers. What was also a very tight battle between Merriweather and David. Henya would poke her nose in every once in a while, take the lead away. Like I said earlier, a lot of comers and goers when it comes to who was leading the race. But like I said earlier, only 3 drivers stood out from everybody else that led more than 10 laps in this race. Another driver that was also peeking in every once in a while was the number 420 Asole, who would lead a few laps and be really aggressive late in the race. With the 30 car, Henya driving out front over top David and Merriweather. Top 3 completely separated from the rest of the pack, leaving behind a ton of track ahead and behind everybody. Henya led 11 laps during this race, which was the 3rd most in the race. Like I said, only 3 cars leading 10 or more laps, Henya being one of them. The other one being Callie, who led 2nd most amount of laps in the race, leading 14 laps. Good showing here by the 73 car. And a lot of those 14 laps came in the second half of the race, especially with around 20 to go, which we will get into here momentarily. But for the 2nd time this season, it is David who leads the most amount of laps in a race, leading 15 in this race last week. Last time he did this was at Daytona, leading similar amount of laps. So a very dominant start to the 77 crew, leading the most amount of laps twice out of those 3 races that we've had so far this season. But there's also another driver that needs to be mentioned here as well. While the 3 that I mentioned were pretty good, another driver that was also coming up through the field was the number 36 of Project Melody. Like I said, green flag pit stops were aplenty, and because of green flag pit stops, that led the field to be very, very, very spread out. There were cars everywhere all over the track battling for several different positions, but it was very different from what we saw the last 2 races before this, where cars were pretty bunched together. This time though, it was all spread out, with the main pack being consistent of 5 or more cars. But it wasn't going to last long either way. Caution comes out on lap 63. Involving in this crash was Hano Mizuki again for the 3rd straight week in a row, and Dreamer, who started on the outside of the pole. They got into it, and then they wrecked in the middle of the track. Both would hit hard in the wall, especially Dreamer head on into the wall, but they were both fine, and they continued running like normal. Now with that caution coming out late in a green flag run, that led most of everybody to come back into the pits and get another fresh set of tires and fill up all the way to the end. While it wouldn't be very costly for the drivers that stayed out, the ones that did pit, they would be at an advantage the final 20 laps of the race. A lot of key drivers that you will see late in the race pitted during this last stop. Lumi and David would be 1 and 2 for our final restart of the race. But that 64 car would not last long at all. Very off-sequenced was the 64 car, and deciding not to pit under that last caution was going to greatly hurt her chances of winning. After a few laps, it was David and Callie once again the class of the field. And class of the field exactly was the case. These 2 were tightly on each other's tails and noses for what felt like forever, in fact. While we only had about 15-20 laps to go, the lap times being 1 minute 30 seconds every lap meant that it felt long between these 2. These 2 traded the lead back and forth, stayed side by side for a majority of this final 20 lap stint to the finish. However, David could fight all he could, but Callie was the stronger car late in the run, and once she got out front, it was nearly impossible to pass her, so it all became a class for second. With David running in second, that does mean that the rest of the cars behind him were going to catch him, especially if he was going to be super aggressive, which David was. And because David was so aggressive, that brought 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th on back to the front of the field, and it was going to be a challenge for not only Callie but also David to see if they could win the race, being the 2 dominant cars up front. However, Callie would defend quite well, so would David, but Callie was going to have an advantage here the last couple of laps, as David just got smaller and smaller in that mirror. But somebody that was getting bigger and bigger in their mirrors was the 90 car of Sprite. Sitting in third, just waiting for an opportunity to strike. There was also one other car that was working their way through the pack and waiting for the opportunity to strike. A car that pitted under that last caution. Sprite would also try to take second place away from David, try to make it very, very clear that she is wanting to make a statement early on in this season. Not wanting to wait till the last lap, not wanting to wait till 2 to go, 6 laps to go, Sprite would try, and try as she might, to take down that 73 car from the lead. With valuable points and valuable track position available, Sprite was very much on the tail of that 73 car. Looking left, looking right, trying to force Callie into a mistake. And with all that being said, from 4th on back, it was a cluster of cars, even 4 wide at one point, with Melody in the picture as well. Callie, who was being oh so perfect the last 15 laps, but with 2 to go, screwed up and started allowing everybody behind her to catch up. After hitting the guardrail more than once, the 73 car was showing some weakness. And somebody was going to take advantage of it. Who was going to be that one to take advantage of it? Project Melody. Melody, who restarted in the middle of the pack, now has an opportunity to make a statement early in the season and get Melody would lead heading into the white flag. However, with Sprite on her tail, this was not a gimme. The window is open for that 36. White flags in the air here on the Rainbow Road. Can Melody hang on? No pressure from behind. This is the first laps, the first amount of laps that Melody has ever led this season. But the pressure of leading and maybe even winning, it's starting to get to that 36. Here comes Sprite, Merriweather. Oh, the leader again in the wall. Melody again in the wall. The pressure. It's mounting up for the race win. Tight goes to 36. Into the wall again, goes to 36. Massive damage on the left side of that 36 car. Here comes Sprite. Looking to send it. Again, this is for the win. This ain't for anything else. This is for the win. Melody has a lot of damage on the left side, but Sprite send it in on second place. That may be all she wrote. There's still a handful of corners left, though. Melody with a small gap, but here comes... Oh, that's tight battle side by side. Again, Melody hits the guardrail. That gap's going to close. Here comes Sprite. She going to send it? She's going to send it. Takes the race lead and makes it stick. Off a turn 11 or whatever, Sprite somehow picks up the win on the Rainbow Road. Holy moly, what a last lap. In one of the craziest last lap pass for the wins, Sprite wins in what could be the race of the season. While that might be too early to tell, what is available to be told is our final results here from the Rainbow Road, with Sprite coming home in first place, leading only 1 lap, the most important lap at least. Melody getting second, leading the 1 lap that she led coming to the white flag. We got Lucky, who finished in third. Merriweather finished in fourth. Selene, who got involved in an accident that involved the Lumen, came back and finished fifth. Dairoki, who kind of was up front for pretty much all race long, he finishes in 6th. Simu in 7th, Fillion in 8th. A good showing by the Texas crew, who finished 1 and 2, both Fillion and Iron Mouse 8th and 9th respectively. And Callie, who was a pretty dominant driver, leading 14 laps, the second most in the race, will finish in 10th. When we go outside the top 10, we'll find David in 11th, who is the one that led the most amount of laps, just finished outside the top 10 after falling backwards the last couple of laps. Same could be said with Soleil. Soleil and David were two drivers that were up front pretty much all race long, but when it mattered most, they fell all the way back to the back of the field. Star would finish at 13th after nearly getting involved in one of the scariest wrecks of the season. Then in the back of the field, we got DJ Overdrive finishing in 14th, Kyoso in 15th, DM in 16th, Weebu recovering from the first caution of the day. Recovers well, gets 17th place. Fu and Ju in 18th, Dreamer, who started in 2nd, finishes in 19th, and William will finish in 20th. Bimbo will finish in 21st, and Nana, who we saw in the beginning of the recap, will finish 22nd after falling back. He will finish in 23rd, Kobo 24th, Fifi 25th, Hano 26th, Fruit 27th. Noriboshi, who came into the race as the points leader, falls all the way back to 28th place, and we will see here in the points here in just a couple minutes that Noriboshi is no longer the points leader heading into today's race. Keisan in 29th, Gura again another abysmal finish in 30th. Lumi finishes 31st after restarting first with the 20 laps to go on that last restart. Henya finishing all the way back at 32nd. Tough day for her. Risu in 33rd, Malcolm Bell 34th, Watson 35th, Bao in 36th, and Lumen DNFing finishing in 37th. With those last three being cars that got involved in wrecks, and Bao the one being a lap down early on in the race. With that out of the way, let's look at the points. We'll have the top 19 showing up on screen right now. But this is the points heading into today's race at Martinsville. We'll now have Soleil up on the top of the charts here in first place. Only 2 points separating them from the winner from Rainbow Road, which is Sprite. DJ Overdrive sits well in third place though, although 12 points behind the points lead. A good showing today by DJ could put them in title contention later down the line. Merriweather could also be a contender for the points lead as well. They are sitting in fourth, just a couple of points behind third. Noriboshi, who was the points leader heading into the race day at Rainbow Road, with a abysmal finish like she got last week, falls 4 spots and drops down to 5th. Couple drivers that gained a lot of spots was both David and Filian. They both gained more than 10 spots. However, on the opposite side of that spectrum, Malcolm lost 11 spots. As you see on the screen here, Malcolm's in 17th, David in 15th, and Filian in 11th. As we are still very early on into the season, as we roll right into Martinsville, a lot of things could change still. We'll see a lot of points positions change here after today's race, but let's look at some drivers that need to have a good finish here today at Martinsville. Kobo, Tairoki, Keisan, they are the first few drivers outside the top 20. Then Selen with a good finish, and as well as Lucky, they're climbing up the ranks here a little bit. Tairoki gained 9 spots. Lumen with that horrible DNF crash will finish, well, last place. That'll put him back to 27th in points. 28th place in points is Bao after just a god-awful showing by the pole sitter. Probably the worst that you'll ever see this season. I hope that nobody tries to outdo that. Melody with a good showing gets a couple spots and is now up to 29th. A couple drivers that desperately need to get something going here. Let's look at the bottom 4 drivers. We got Dreamer, who gained a spot after all the BS that happened on the first lap. He ends up in 34th after gaining a spot. Hano Mizuki sitting back in 35th, Nana in 36th, and Fruit in 37th, with Fruit losing a few spots. All of those set drivers need to have a good finish here today at Martinsville. In the span of 2 weeks, we go from a big road course track to a paperclip short track. Our 4th race of the VTuber Racing 2024 season took us to Martinsville Motor Speedway for 250 laps around this incredibly short circuit. With the front row consisted of David and Project Melody, the race got off to a very interesting start. Let's get a recap underway. Not in the chaotic sense when thinking about the beginning of this race, more of a calm start, which is something unusual for this type of series, and at this track as well. David takes the lead and pulls out to an early jump, followed by a bunch of double file cars. Didn't take long though before we get another driver up at the front of the field. In fact, we had a lot of cars up at the front of the field. We'll talk more about that here momentarily. With this being a short track, however, speeds were averaging around 100 miles an hour through the straightaways and down to about 80 to 90 in the corners, bringing that average speed down to 95 to 110 miles an hour. As drivers kept getting out, spread out in single file, the one consistent though was an entertaining front pack. Short track racing is going to bring us a lot of drivers only having the lead for a short amount of time. 93 lead changes out of a 250 lap event shared between 16 different drivers. And the most important stat line this week is the fact that 6 drivers led more than 20 laps. We'll talk about some of those who led even more than 30 laps here in just a second. But 93 lead changes is a lot for a short track just like Martinsville. 16 drivers though, that is roughly the least amount of drivers who led a lap in a race. Now, one driver that led not just more than 20 laps, but more than 30 was the number 60 car of Merriweather, who led 37 laps in this race. One of the most dominant runs of this season, but not even in this race was he the most dominant driver. That honor goes to, for the third time in 4 weeks, the number 77 car of David, who has led the most amount of laps not only in this race but also all season, out leading himself at Daytona and at Rainbow Road. Which is also a bit surprising considering what David's strategy was for the pit cycle, which was short pitting way early than everybody else. And we also had some incidents here. However, not all incidents resulted in a safety car. This one, surprisingly, not resulting in a safety car on lap 89. Somehow not a safety car, even though there was a lot of chaos unfolding here. William getting the worst out of that whole deal during green flag pit stops. But that wasn't the only time that we had an incident that didn't result in a safety car. Oh no. Just 9 laps later, 37 of DM gets spun around on the backstretch, and just like 9 laps prior, no safety car was thrown. David got back out front after everybody came back into the pits and got up to the tail end of this pack. With a gap like this between first and second, you would think David would not race the lap cars that badly. Well, he did, and brought out the first safety car. This one was thrown. With David spinning out the 70 of Kobo, bringing out the caution, that kind of killed David's run at being so far out front as the restart occurred with the whole field bunched back up. And if you're wondering if Kobo would be a little aggravated at David from that whole incident, costing not only Kobo spots, but also being a lap down, trapped a lap down, she did race him very hard. We also had another incident here that was called for a caution on lap 111. Dreamer getting into Henya, spinning them down the track, then coming back up into the field, collecting Weebu and Noriboshi. They would all be fine, everybody would be fine, but it was our second incident of the day. After that, the rest of the race was ran all green to the end. And with that came a whole lot of amazing battles up front. Lots of side-by-side racing here, and even so much so, more aggressive racing for third on back. Lots of double file action up front, but one driver that was starting to mount a impressive comeback from the week prior was the number 52 of Lumen. His story is well known at the Rainbow Road, getting involved in one of the scariest accidents of not only the race, but also the season. He is mounting a comeback on this shot right now, leading 2 laps in this race total. However, leading at a race like this at Martinsville is gonna bring a lot of pressure from behind. Tight racing here. This was all throughout the day. This wasn't just a one-time occurrence. This was all day that we saw the person behind first place getting that close to the rear bumper of the person in front of them. Surprisingly, didn't result in too many crashes. More drivers that were in the backfield, though, that were mounting a great end to this race. The number 77 at David, and again, the points leader coming out of this race and going into Dover, Soleil. They were all trying to catch the 3 cars ahead of them. The one that was doing the best out of that was David, making quick work of Watson, getting up to 3rd, and then making even quicker work of the 60 of Merriweather. It wouldn't take long for the 77 to once again find himself in position to not only take the lead away, but win this race. A driver that has been pretty terrible in terms of finishing out a race, he had a chance to win it. But Merriweather had something to say about that. Another driver who's been very dominant in the early going of this season. The top 2 dominant cars of the day, battling it out for the race win. It was going to be a tough task for anybody from 3rd on back to make a move, especially when David throws it in underneath Merriweather, aggressively taking the race lead away. It was going to have to be a mistake for one of these 2 drivers to cost them the win, and that happened to Merriweather. And this was all coming to the white flag. Again, Merriweather. Oh, no, no, no! Into the 52 and around goes the 52. I think we stay green. It's 2 to go. They're racing back. David, Soleil, Watson, 1, 2, 3. White flag's in the air. David, the pole sitter, with the race lead. Soleil's going to look down low. Can she send it? She won't send it this time. One more turn for Soleil to make something happen. Nose to tail, 1 and 2. David, the pole sitter, looking to end a curse that has belittled a lot of top 10 drivers. David, the pole sitter, leads a lot of laps and will lead the final lap and win it at Martinsville. The results from Martinsville will show a number of storylines heading into Dover. The main thing being that a lot of drivers that start in the back half of the race will end up finishing good at the end of the race. Some examples. Look at Merriweather, who finishes in 4th place after the whole slew of incidents that he got into with 2 laps to go. He started 28th. Watson started 24th. Those last 2 names both led more than 20 laps. Risu finishes in 7th after starting in 36th place. Lumen, after a great comeback, sadly, that falls short, and he'll finish in 14th place. Star, who we saw lead a lot of laps, not only led 20 laps in this race, but unfortunately fell back to 15th to finish out that. But the one big thing, too, here out of all of this is our points leader coming into and out of this race. Soleil picks up another great finish, starting in 19th, finishes in 2nd after leading 6 laps. Drivers that did not do so well in this race includes the number 85 of Nana, who started in 5th place and led 23 laps. The only driver in this shot here that led any laps at all. Everybody else, from Simu, who finished in 19th, all the way down to Kobo, who finished 1 lap down in 37th place, they stayed irrelevant the entire day, with the exception of William, who got a bit of a shout because he got involved in an incident with him and Bao and many others. Lots of irrelevancy in this shot right here from 19th all the way down. Some unfortunate irrelevancy too, especially for Iron Mouse, who started the day right where she ended up finishing around the 28th, 29th region. Again, Iron Mouse was the one that won at Texas not too long ago. Let's look at the points heading into the race coming up at Dover and coming out of the Martinsville race. Soleil again hanging on to the points lead, opening up that gap between first and second, which is Sprite by 14 points. Merriweather hanging on though in third place, gaining a spot out of that, closing that gap between first and third down to 15 points. But one that's sneaking in is David in fourth. Keep an eye on David as we head into the rest of this season. That'll be a quick update though. I'll give more of a bigger one once we send it back into the studio. Now with all of those recaps out of the way, let's quickly talk about what to look forward to within the next couple of months here for this series. Like I said, the next race will be at Dover. It'll be a very interesting race, but we'll talk more about that when we get to that point. One thing that we're going to be looking for here in the next couple of weeks is our storylines that we briefly touched on here in those recap videos. The main one being drivers that start in the back half of the field, moving their way on up to the front of the field by the end of it. Will that continue heading forward, or were the first 4 races just an anomaly? Another thing that we have to mention too is the pole sitter, which is kind of ties in with what we talked about just minutes ago. It kind of ties into the fact that the pole sitter always ends up being cursed with finishing badly, even after dominating a race. Another thing that we got to look for here is, of course, championship contenders. Off the top, you got the top 5. You have Soleil, you have Sprite, you have Merriweather, you have David. Those 4 out of the top 5 and points heading into Dover all have a great shot of winning the championship heading forward. But will they keep this kind of momentum up as we move on to not only Dover, but several different races that'll determine the championship pretty early on in the season? We have Talladega coming up here within the next couple of weeks. Like I said, I'll go over more of them once we get towards Dover next week in the pre-race here. I'll reveal the 5 tracks that we will be running after Dover, and so on and so forth. But with that out of the way, that's enough time here. I'll let everybody enjoy their holiday and their New Year's off. We will be back next week on the 31st of December at 9 o'clock in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. And we will be back to race all over again and continue this season. That out of the way, thank you guys for watching, and have a good one.